Hey, I'm Dr. Elisa DeMena, and I'm back with the first official lecture of the season. And what it is it's an introduction to anatomy and physiology as a science, just to get your head around a little bit of how we're going to approach this semester and some of the key themes that we'll be looking at as we continue throughout the rest of the class. So the two designations in the title, anatomy and physiology, defined are anatomy is the study of the structure of all the body parts and their relationship to one another, organs, organ systems, and physiology is the study of how they operate or the function and exactly how and what role they play in carrying out important obviously functions that help keep humans alive and well within the ranges of homeostasis. And homeostasis is a word we're going to come back to in a bit and quite often. So other subdivisions of anatomy are things like microscopic anatomy and developmental anatomy as well. So microscopic anatomy is dealing with everything that's like just below the naked eye's ability to see. And so that would be things like cell biology, or we call cytology, and we take groups and clusters of cells together and weave them into a fabric, an interrelated network of the same type of cell. That's a tissue. So those communities or tissues of cells, that's known as histology. So what else? Oh, developmental. Right. So developmental anatomy is actually a lot of fun. I think it deals with developmental biology, developmental anatomy, which is still part of biology. What that's doing is it usually deals with the front end of a developing organism, so like embryology, right? So as an organism develops or is nascently brought into being, certain genes are going to switch on and off throughout that process in order for proper structures to form over time. There's a lot of genetics in it, and I think that part's kind of a lot of fun. Also, developmental anatomy is branching out into further stages of life, which is incredibly helpful. Understanding things that are kind of unique to humans, like the fact that we live so long. And we'll come back to these topics a lot. In many other animals, after individuals have completed their reproductive part of their life, usually they often don't survive much longer. However, in humans, we have an entire another lifetime. It's, and we'll talk about it later, it's grouped under the grandmother hypothesis, but it's providing some really interesting and unique insights and developments in the field of developmental anatomy. So when we talk about subdivisions of physiology, they're not really maybe proper subdivisions in a classical sense, but they kind of follow that gross anatomy and then microanatomy theme. So for physiology in terms of like macro would be organ systems or organ level function and how they participate in the body to maintain homeostasis. Sorry, Mike. Okay. The other one, and this is the one that I spent more time on, is going to be dealing with things like cellular and molecular level types of physiology, cell biology, cell function, how genes work, how metabolism functions, and all of that good stuff. The idea of complementarity exists between anatomy and physiology, and that's one of the reasons why we always have those two things together. You can't just take an anatomy class, you can't just take a physiology class, because they're inextricably linked. They require each other in order to exist and operate. So some of the other key themes that you'll hear, and you probably already started hearing about this in your biology classes, are structure and function. That's a big one. So function always represents structure, and structure gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect out of your function. Not every time, but a lot of the time. Right. Another couple of concepts I want to talk about are the hierarchy of organization. And again, you probably covered this in your biology classes, but just a recap, since we're going to be looking at this a lot this semester. Hold on. Hydration. key to homeostasis. Okay, anywho. Right, so the smallest level that we work on is considered to be the chemical level. And that encompasses a group, so things like atoms and molecules and even organelles to some level. The cellular level is really an important one because that is the level of the entire cell. Arrangement of all of these structures leading to one single cell at its minimum, which is able to reproduce and respond to environment. That's the unit of life. Like, that is the basic unit of life. You have to at least be a cell big to be alive. So everything beyond that kind of tends to do this thing with us in eukaryotes, multicellular eukaryotes, where we form tissues, which are these like networks, communities of cells, which are usually linked up specifically together, or they're, in a matrix all together, and they survive in these unique environments as a somewhat single entity. These tissues also collaborate to form macrostructures, which we know as organs, right? So after we get to the organ level, these organs are arranged specifically and function within what we call an organ system, okay? And then when we put all of these systems together, we have what we call the organismal level. So even though, cells are the most basic unit of life, and we are made up of a lot of them, and we're also home to tons and tons of microorganisms, which are single-celled and multicellular. For us, at least in human anatomy and physiology, the organism level, that's what we tend to focus on in its entirety. And this is a graphic from the textbooks. So as you can see, there's atoms, and they come together and they form a molecule. These molecules can assemble together and form an organelle. Like, oddly enough, the organelle that they have pictured here, hold on, this little nugget is interesting because, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, technically it is an endosymbiont, which means it has its own genome, and it may not even know that it lives inside of a cell, and we consider it an organelle. It's representing a mitochondria, but we'll come back to that. Essentially, though, the idea of an organelle is it's an organ inside of a cell, which functions like the organs inside of your body. So the full unit itself, so the nucleus and the DNA and all the organelles and the ability to replicate, that is the cell level, the single unit. And then here we have a tissue, a lattice, a network, a neighborhood of cells all grouped together. They cooperate with other types of tissues to form organs, so this is an organ level. And then all of the different organs, how do you point to all those blood vessels? But I'm pointing to the blood vessels is the point. And then the heart, obviously. All of the different types of organs collaborating together form one of the organ systems. And the organ system participating with the rest of the organ systems results in the organismal level. It's like the single, complete individual. Necessary life functions. Let's look at those. It's important to maintain your boundaries. Maintain those boundaries. For us, a lot of the maintenance of boundaries has to do with water, honestly, and things that are in water or water we need, and then to some extent oil-based stuff. And so we'll get into that. Speaking of water. Okay, so inside of your cell, it's a very saline environment, right? And as it tends to go, biology says that life evolved likely in oceans and aqueous environments. And so the inside of all the cells mirrors that environment still to this day. However, the rest of the body, if you think about it, like the outside of your skin is probably dry, you're probably sitting in a room, you're not submerged in an ocean anywhere. You're on land, you exist in the air. So we have some pretty serious boundaries there, and we have some pretty serious boundaries to maintain if we're going to keep that ocean-like environment from simply becoming dehydrated or spilling all over or absorbing some kind of toxin. So what we'll look at a lot of are physical boundaries such as tissues, and you know, the different ways that they maintain those boundaries, keep certain things out and certain things in, and certain things just turning over regularly. And we'll look at that at the macroscopic level, like, you know, the tissue level, and then we'll also look at that in the microscopic level, so plasma membrane, cellular stuff. Movement, we are Animalia, and the hallmark of Animalia is muscle and motion. And so there's going to be a lot of that. We have to move in order to survive, whether it's just getting enough exercise or having enough peristalsis to send that breakfast burrito from the top of your gullet all the way through your intestines so you can absorb those nutrients. Movement is present. Responsiveness is another one. You have to be able to respond to your environment. That means move away from things that are dangerous or move towards the stash of breakfast burritos that you needed in order to live that day for sustenance. We have to be able to sense our environment. And even the teeny tiniest, most primitive cells do things like sense light, so they swim towards or swim away. We have more complex levels of responsiveness, luckily. So we do things like maintain internal temperature, internal CO2 and O2 balances, water balances, saline balances. So there's quite a bit to that. So it can be, again, at micro level or a macro level. You have to also be able to digest stuff. You have to be able to take in some form of nutrients, like some type of chemical and energetics, and transform them into repairing structures, developing structures. For us, again, it's the breakfast burrito type scenario. Although it's very interesting and very complex for many of the other branches of life, we'll primarily stick to this one. Metabolism. So metabolism, a lot of us think of metabolism as, oh, you have a fast metabolism, or I have a slow metabolism, and it has to do with eating and possibly exercising, and that's true. But truthfully, metabolism is like the sum total of all of the reactions in the body, and it's primarily exists between anabolism and catabolism, meaning building and breaking down of molecules. Excretion, you gotta get the waste out. You can't be swimming around in that. It's not good. It's toxic for a reason. It disrupts normal function. It collects, gathers, and disrupts. So you must be able to have proper excretion. Reproduction. This is twofold. So for us, the larger multicellular eukaryotes, we have two types of reproduction. Technically one's really growth, but it depends on the biologist. But for us, at least, we think of reproduction as mitosis, right? So cell division, repairing tissues, developing tissues, turnover. The other one, the organismal macro level type of reproduction that we're concerned with, is actually meiosis linked. And so that is the development and production of new offspring, of making babies. So replacing the population. The genome doesn't think of itself as existing just in you. It thinks of itself in all of the other constituents of the community that can breed. So reproduction. Growth, increases in size of body parts, of organism changes over time. Usually this is linked with things like responsiveness and development. So humans are multicellular, meaning we have more than one cell, meaning we have a lot of cells and a lot of different cells that do different things. And the whole thing is we've got to keep the majority, at least, of these cells alive and functioning happily, homeostatically, in order to remain, quite frankly, alive altogether as a multicellular organism. So in order to do that, in order to service the needs of all of these cells, we've developed 11 organ systems, which we're going to look at in this next upcoming lecture. So each one of these 11 organ systems is essential, and the loss of one of them would be essentially terminal to the individual. Now, science and medicine have come a long way, but it's important to study how these overall organ systems participate with all the other systems, which is still something we don't entirely understand. So even in this class, we're going to give you the best shot, but new discoveries are going to be made every single day. It's important that you, as a practitioner or as an upcoming researcher, do your best to look up the most current information. Just because you took this class, just because you have a textbook, doesn't mean in 5 and 10 years this information is going to be correct. And it's definitely a good idea to do something like look up the most current research, which is just, it's like a search on the internet away from reputable, so NCBI, NIH type sources, and there are many others, so that you are always current with what you need to know. All right, so let's get started with the organ systems, 11 organ systems in the next, I guess, talk, little mini lecture? Right, but let's get to it.